So today we're going to be discussing the new initiative that's just come through from the UK government with regards to COVID certification. Previously, we've all been understanding that COVID certificates were going to be used for international travel to enable borders to be controlled and control the virus. The latest new development that was spoken about by Boris Johnson just a couple of days ago implied very strongly, was strongly recommended that nightclubs and venues should introduce a form of COVID certification, probably using the NHS app, in order to allow people to actually go into their venues. This is a huge change from the legitimate or perceived legitimacy of a passport for international travel has now moved into the realm of our social world and our social interactions. So we are having a conversation today at CCSR to discuss this really very, very contentious issue. So I'd like to open the floor now to anybody who would like to come in and make a comment about this. The first comment.
I'll chip in if I may, and just at the outset to say, should we be surprised, bearing in mind the continuous encroachment of a wider variety of technologies and sensors, not just into our communities through the likes of smart cities and so forth, but into our homes, not just through telehealth kind of interventions, but also through the whole notion of smart homes and the Internet of Things. Should we be surprised at this kind of shift in emphasis, or this shift in possibility, or shift in threat?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we were talking before we came on camera, weren't we, about the way that technology has a habit of shifting and then becoming more than we could have imagined. We were discussing that earlier, and I think this is another case in point that it's no surprise that there is mission creep with initiatives that initially seem like a good idea to protect us and could actually be used to survey us. So yeah, very, very good case in point.
I mean, I think there are a number of issues around what's going to be acceptable, what's going to be, how is this going to be, I suppose, structured, how it's going to be monitored, how it's going to be used in all its kind of different ways. So, for example, what is going to be an acceptable COVID vaccine passport? If you don't have a phone that can support the app, if you don't have the app, if you can't log into the app, or if you, for whatever reason, don't have an NHS vaccine, then what's going to happen? Are there going to be alternative mechanisms? Is there going to be some way to kind of say, look, I am still okay? How is this going? I think it's one thing to say, oh yeah, you should still be doing it. But I think, as with often with these things, there are lots of ramifications that really haven't been well thought through, and especially if sorry, that slightly got me off, and especially when we're talking about lots of quite small businesses that actually aren't very well set up for this yet. It's been quite a surprise, I think. My local radio was talking to some of these small businesses, and they're actually quite horrified because, especially a nightclub that's been shut for quite a long time, for it to know that it can open, but suddenly to have these other kind of restrictions on top of it, I think people are finding quite difficult to kind of just think about how to deal with.
And also the responsibilities. Who's actually going to be the person that's checking these passports or certificates? Is it going to be that person who's standing on the door, who's actually security? Should they have that level of responsibility, and will they be sufficiently trained and compensated for that sort of extra thing that they're having to do? So yeah, it seems like an incredible burden. Go for it, Simi. Just dive in.
Yeah, my take on this will be that on the face of it, on the face of it, it will fairly unfairly discriminate against a significant chunk of the society. Given that only 52% of the population in the UK have gotten the vaccine, are fully vaccinated, a significant number of the population will definitely be barred from public life and public places because of this. And also from the little research I'm conducting on ethnic perceptions on the vaccine and the contact tracing app, some ethnic minority communities are more likely to be vaccine hesitant due to historic mistrust in the system, which means that the vaccine passport could end up inadvertently discriminate against people on the basis of race, and that's a problem. Discrimination is an issue here.
Well, I would say race and age as well, ability.
Yeah, because the funny thing is, the people who want to go to nightclubs are those people who are less likely to have actually been vaccinated due to their age. So it's almost making it more difficult for nightclubs to open. Simi, did you want to come back in?
Yes, I was just going to talk about the ethics of the data that is being collected and whether any thoughts has been put into the ethical issues that may arise, because this is information that I would normally give to a government agency, perhaps the NHS, to be able to demonstrate that I've been vaccinated. But do I want to give it to my local pub? Do I want them to be able to, even for as little as have the access to this information or be aware whether or not I've been vaccinated, even if it's for public good? I'm not really sure they're in a position to curtail that kind of information. And then what is going to happen to the blockchain of the data? Is it going to be stored by the nightclub? Is it going to be perhaps maybe transferred, or is it just going to be for viewing purposes and then it gets transferred? I think all this information or all this are issues that would obviously affect the implementation of this vaccine passports in nightclubs. And another thing I wanted to also talk about is the voluntariness versus mandatory purposes of the need to show these vaccine passports. If the government is saying that they reserve the right to implement this forcefully or maybe make it mandatory for pubs to implement it, what would be the basis of that? Would it also be public good still, or are we now going into other issues? And is there a case for it for pubs to actually maybe put this in a business case that helps them? Are they going to be losing businesses just because people would not want to come in? There are a lot of issues that just get interlocked into making this a mandatory process for pubs to adhere to.
Yeah, really interesting point, Simi. Thank you. Completely. Welcome, Ade.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me it's a bit like when you sign up for something online, like an app or a piece of software, and they go, you've got the choice to agree to the terms and conditions or not to use it. And this seems to me it's going to be a bit like that. So you can come into the pub if you're show us your vaccine passport. Obviously, you've got the choice not to. That means you can't come in. But is that really a choice then? And no. That you get into this kind of, I think, rather grey area of what is it you're doing with this? How are you enabling people's? It's not just ethics; it's kind of human rights as well.
Yeah, there was an interesting conversation yesterday somebody was saying that it also works as a coercion to get vaccinated, because the COVID certificate is allowing three things: a fully vaccinated, antibodies, or a negative test. Yes. And the problem for that is younger people or people who want to go out and what have you, they don't want to be in a position whereby every time they want to go out, they've got to do a COVID test, which means that a lot of younger people will just go, oh, okay, I'll just get vaccinated because this is such a hassle, and I want to go to the nightclub with my mates, and I want to be able to go when I choose. I want somebody able to ring me up at 8 o'clock at night, and I want to be able to go into that nightclub at 10 o'clock at night on the same night. And those sorts of things, when you have to show that you've got, you've been vaccinated or you've had a negative test, it means that puts a whole different onus on people and restricts people's abilities to actually.
I think there's an essential point here that I think we're finding our way or moving towards, and that's that we are entering on a kind of personal, individual basis a world of trade-offs where would like to make free decisions to go to the nightclub, go to the supermarket, get in our cars,
to work,
and so forth, go to work, yes, indeed. But actually, where more and more preconditions may be put in front of us, which we have to agree to in order to do that, and those preconditions include obviously monitoring of our travel, monitoring of our behavior, monitoring of our purchasing decisions, monitoring of our social life, or monitoring of the drugs that we take or we buy from the chemist. You name it. This is a world of trade-offs because obviously the systems will be designed to gather information which can then be used to influence our behaviors, including our social behaviors.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but this issue of coercion makes me to think about something, because voluntary informed consent is a key principle of medical ethics. So does this make a mockery of voluntary informed consent? That's the question we need to ask ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's definitely of a serious concern. It's funny, actually, what you were just saying there, Malcolm, as well, about the idea of it's like the Ben Franklin thing, isn't it? We give up our liberty and I can't remember the direct quote, but we give up it for security and end up with neither. It's always like we're so scared, or the fear is so strong that it overrides any of the other sensibilities that we may have.
Just to put a particular bit of spin on that, I mean, we have been in what's the right word, encouraged to extend our trust to governments and to publicly funded institutions in order for our protection and so forth and our safety in the world that we live in. We might still be willing to do that if we trust our governments, but quite clearly, where there's so many private organisations that are involved here, that clearly whose priorities are not the social good, then I think our trust is going to be very much less likely to be given to those institutions.
Quite, and from what Simi was just saying a moment ago, I mean, with regards to the legal status and everything else, are we also looking at giving that same level of trust to nightclubs? Is that the point? Are we going to be comfortable as in society to say, okay, on the one hand we sort of half trust the government-ish, so we sort of give in to the idea of them having a certain amount of data, and we appreciate for the public good that is necessary. But then are we basically moving to a realm where private organisations like nightclubs are acting as de facto data collection agents for the government? And therefore we should, in theory, have the same level of trust of some nightclub and the people operating in there as we should in a data collection activity for the NHS. So
no, I think we're getting it wrong. I think what the government has said, the vaccine passport, the way it will work is if you can generate a QR code from your NHS pass, you just need to present it to the nightclub. You're not giving the nightclub your information. You're not giving any data to the nightclub. Except
for the fact they're still going to collect that data, and that data will have your identification on it. The fact that you are verifying that your particular status to the nightclub means that they have that data as well. Because they won't let you in even if it's QR code, they won't let you in if they're going to. They have to check first to make sure that person and that certificate match before they allow you in.
Damien's point is a crucial one, though. What happens to the data, and what protections do we have about that data being misused, or in our view, what would be misuse?
Well, absolutely.
I mean, I'm not. Well, it's not clear exactly what is going to happen with that data. I mean, it seems that you can request an NHS COVID pass, which is a QR code that lasts for 28 days. But it's not clear that these places are actually going to check that against some formal database. Because that would involve actually quite a lot more infrastructure than I think exists. But as I said, it's not clear. They may or they may not. It's not clear whether or not they're going to retain that information. So Simi was pointing out in terms of privacy, are they going to have to declare what they're doing with this information when they're recording it? Is it going to have to be a big notice on the door of the nightclub saying, this is what we're going to do with your information that we've got from scanning your QR code? And as was pointed out, would you believe them if they said what they were going to do with it? Yes, we're collecting it and storing it. No, we're not. We're checking it. No, we're not. You know, who do you believe? Where would you place your trust? And I think that there is the option to actually get a letter for people that don't have the technology. So they are thinking of maybe ways around it as well. But then it's also got the same, how do you prove that's valid? How, you know, why can one person not get it and then pass it on to someone else?
Precisely, you know, that happened.
Editing, you know, creating documents is not that difficult these days with a little bit of technological know-how. So again, I think there are still lots of little loopholes here and cracks through which various things might kind of seep through that really haven't been well thought through.
The FA Cup final, the Cup final, the Euros final was a very good example of the chaos that ensues when you're trying to do that sort of checking as well. From what I understand, there were many people that got in without tickets. Lots of people who were going in legitimately did not have those checks done on their status. So that was supposed to be a flagship event. So if they can't get it even remotely right, I worry about you know, other venues and other things being able to equally get it right.
This is an interesting point because I know we're focusing on pubs earlier on. Another organization that needs to worry about is churches, and these are organizations that do not have the organizational structure to check IDs at the door before people enter. So there will be organizational chaos for these churches as they get people in for services, and I don't know whether they would then have to have kind of reorganization of the structure they have in order to accommodate this type of checks.
Yeah, and don't forget again, you know, when people do start visiting this country again, say Damien has some guests that he wants to take into church with him, but they've been vaccinated in their own country, not in the UK, therefore not by the NHS. What then happens? Because they would claim legitimacy in terms of where they come from, but would that be recognised as legitimacy in this country?
Well, of course, you had that problem as well with the vaccines. Can you get a passport because it's not necessarily a one on the schedule? So if you've had a vaccine from anywhere else that's not on the schedule, then that means that you're basically excluded from that scheme.
Yes, I saw a thing on the news about someone who lives in the UK and has been vaccinated. I think it has only just had one vaccination, so can't travel out. Parents live abroad, been vaccinated there, but can't travel in because they haven't got the British vaccination. So they're stuck in the same position as they were before, not being able to go and visit family and connect with people over quite a long, you know, after like a year and a half of lockdown.
And also, coming back to your mentioned thing about churches there, Damien, there is, of course, at the moment, they're only really pushing this for entertainment venues. So there is at the moment discrimination between, you know, these different types of venues, whereas actually you could have, particularly in, say, an evangelical church, you could be having just as much of a party type atmosphere going on in one of those churches as you could in a club, where at the moment the churches are not being encouraged to introduce this yet, but the clubs are. So the activity can sometimes be similar, and the number of people within that venue, it could be similar, but because one is entertainment and one is religious religion, they're treated differently. But actually, if it's purely and simply about protecting people, it shouldn't matter why somebody is in a particular building. It's the fact that they're in that building and they are, you know, exerting energy, therefore expiring more, you know, and all the rest of it. So that's also discriminatory. You know, it should be, if it's for public health, it should be across the board and not just tip to wink at nightclubs, which I thought was a bit weird myself.
Just picking up on one of the issues there about the control of entry, And Damien made the point about the administrative organizational hassle or impossibility sometimes of putting the organizational frameworks in place. And of course, the fear here is, and it relates to our issue about trust, is that the easiest way to control entry would be through technological means, through having the data on a centralized database, so that you have to, touch in, touch out, or whatever it happens to be, and that someone can simply monitor the green light that comes on when you enter those particular premises.
Yeah.
Which means a centralized database of some sort.
Yeah, and it means a government controlled system. So government comes in and basically installs the relevant swipe, whatever it is, thing for your venue. So all the churches and everywhere else would have to apply for that to be installed. I mean, but then we really are getting into the world of government control over every aspect of our lives, and knowing exactly how many times a week you go to church, how many times a week you go to the nightclub, all those sorts of things that maybe weren't known before. So it extends the surveillance society by a significant amount by introducing this into social spaces. And I would count churches in amongst social spaces in the same way as nightclubs for this particular purpose, where people gather.
Then you're into much more major issues about political philosophy and, the role of the state. And obviously, if you're in China, then if you go into a church, you will be surveyed anyway, and that will be registered, and that will go off your social credit. So, we do need to look at more fundamental issues. Looking at the Times, it appears that two of the major nightclubs of Recom UK and Tokyo Industries have already stated they're not going to do any checking. And I think, one would need to try and understand more how that checking would be, because as you've said, it would be a major issue for nightclubs if they've got to install technology, connect to databases. So the government saying, well, you can do this must suggest that there's no technological implementation required. And maybe it's just the bouncer on the door seeing that you've got some kind of certificate. But I think there's more fundamental issues about authorities and, whether we are prepared to be a socially responsible society or whether we require legislation. So the masks come off next week, for example, but certainly I will continue to wear a mask on a bus, although it's not mandatory, although in London Transport it is. I was going to say,
it is in some places, yes, and you could see other cities might well follow.
Yes.
Sorry, Neil, you also mentioned, Neil, social credit. I mean, that's a fearful vision you put in front of us, the notion that with our activities being monitored, that there is some kind of reward for conformity, as opposed for regimented, coerced, directed conformity, as opposed to simply us being good citizens and doing what we feel is correct.
Well, it depends what you mean by good citizens. In China, you're often working with an ideology, and a good citizen is somebody who is absorbing or reflecting Chinese culture. So the Uyghurs in northern China and the Christians and the Tibetans do not. So what do you define as social good and a good society? What do you define as safe? It's interesting that the Chinese term for a smart city is a safe city. And then you're defining safe as somebody who is, doing, is reflecting Chineseness, if you like. So I think there's a lot of issues here. And if you look at the BBC article, which I've just gone and lost, here it is. There is, a philosophical argument. So Mr. Johnson, whatever you think of him, is talking about social responsibility. And the spokesperson for the nightclubs is talking about authoritarian discrimination and authoritarian COVID passports. I think it more comes down to really a philosophy of, are we just individuals who should do what we like, or are we working as society where perhaps we put on masks not because we feel at risk, because I'm not at risk really with a double vaccine, because I want to express remove anxiety from other people who may be at risk because I'm trying to be a responsible person of society. So it comes down to, really, it does go back to ethics and whether we are seeing ourselves as developing virtues and considering ourselves as members of society where we're trying to help each other, or whether it is in the Enlightenment terms that our ethics come down to our individual choice, and it's a matter then of either an institutional utilitarian view of, what does the institutes decide is the best for everybody, or the deontological view, well, I decide on what is my, what would I expect other people to do to me.
So actually, you mentioned about that, whether or not we're doing it to kind of reassure people they're wearing masks, and you mentioned the London transport, and Sajid Khan, the London mayor, has actually used one of those as the reasons. One of the reasons was not just to protect people, but to reassure people.
Yeah, it's a form of signalling,
right.
isn't it?
Yes.
It's also, if you wear a mask, it's also a form of signalling to others that you are respecting the conventions, and also, you consider that the virus is an issue, or that you are trying to indicate to others that you are trying to keep them safe.
Yes.
So there's a lot of virtue signalling going on with mask wearing.
Yes.
And also
the
opposite
term
of
virtual
that.
signaling makes it virtue signaling is about reflecting onto my identity, that I fit in with a certain view, whereas I think wearing a mask is about social responsibility, and it's about considering others. I think there's a lot of ethical issues in here. We have to unwind the technical issues and understand them, and that's what we as a research group have been doing through our new article in the European Journal of Risk Regulation. But there's also underpinning that understanding a balance of where do we sit in a democratic society, and what are our responsibilities. So if I'm a 25-year-old and I want to go to a nightclub, it may be that my social responsibilities in making that choices, I will choose to go and queue for a short while to get vaccines, which will protect myself, but will also provide substantial, not 100%, but substantial protection for those around me. So my choice is not about me, and it's about, I want to protect those around me. So
I just want to get access to the nightclub.
Yes, it could be. I just want to get access to the nightclub, and therefore, as part of social responsibility, I will go and get vaccinated or demonstrate that I'm negative for COVID.
I do think that a certain group, and there's a large group, that really don't give a monkeys about the social responsibility, and literally seeing it as just a way of getting into the nightclubs and free and easy access. And that was, of course, one of the problems that was raised, that it was a form of backdoor coercion to get people vaccinated who perhaps would not have done if it wasn't for the fact they wanted a social life. Go on, Damien, please.
Yes, I have a comment here. The introduction of the vaccine passport will have two effects. One, for those who are already convinced that there's a grand plan by the government to surveil them, it will definitely discourage them from taking up the vaccine. And for those who are, it may be a so-so, then it will encourage them to take up the vaccine. These are the two effects the introduction of the vaccine passports will have. But another comment I want to make is this: we talked about earlier on about whether the bars will have access to a central database to cross-check the QR codes. If they don't have access to that, then there is a possibility of people creating fake passports or fake QR codes that can be used at the door. And that will have a far-reaching effect in terms of the spread of the virus anyway.
And do you know who's going to be the majority users of those fake codes, Damien?
Sorry?
I mean,
do you know, have you got a guess about who's going to be the majority user of those fake codes?
Young people.
Yes, under 18s.
Exactly.
It's well known that there's a whole set of fake IDs going around. So the next thing will be your fake COVID vaccine passport, so that you can go out and join in with the adults. And those are the ones that are least likely to be taking care, and the ones that are least likely to well, they're not going to be vaccinated. Apparently, I haven't heard plans to vaccinate under 18s, but might well be carrying, and are less likely to be kind of cautious in a general sense anyway.
Yes, good point.
Yeah.
Sorry, Neil?
Neil, did you want to come back on that?
I think that is a good point. There's an issue with virtues that you know, you develop them. So I don't expect from a 15-year-old a maturity and responsibility that I might expect from a 25-year-old turning up to a nightclub. But then there is the responsibility for the nightclub to take decisions, and you know, if it's 18 plus, put effort into excluding 15-year-olds. So there is, you know, society is complex and has many interactions, and part of it is responsibilities of the nightclub too, to consider its responsibilities, its social responsibility as a corporation, and to consider its responsibility towards the kids who are coming into the nightclub, and the issues. Okay, the 18 to 25-year-olds less likely to, with COVID, less likely to end up in hospital, much less likely to be severe or die. But I would point out the severe problem and the growing problem of long COVID, which is basically ME or CFS, which can debilitate a young person for years. So there is a responsibility there. And I think one thing it comes down to also is knowledge and understanding. If our 18 to 25-year-olds realise that, you know, if they get COVID, it might be just the snivels, they might not even know it, but they might have 15, 20 years of their life ruined through ME, which is extremely difficult to get out of, as I know, because my wife had it for 20 years. They may start thinking twice and learning some responsibility.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, I think we've reached a really good point here to call an end to this discussion. It's been really, really interesting and really current. So thank you, everybody, for your contributions, and we'll see you all another time. Thank you very much.
See you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.